Okay, so today's episode is actually a fan-requested episode. So you guys, the listeners, are the ones that gave me the idea to do this episode. And it's actually really cool that this is the episode you guys suggested, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But today we're talking about seeking God. We're talking about seeking God, and I think that's such an amazing thing. Basically what happened is I was interacting with some of the fans, we're talking, and a lot of the guys that listen are just my personal friends. And so I was like, yo, what do you guys want to see? What do you guys like, you're listening to the podcast, and that's awesome. Or maybe you're like, on the podcast a bit, and you guys are supportive. What do you guys want to see me talk more about? And the number one answer that I got was, can we talk more about pursuing God instead of the things of this earth? Like focusing on God instead of ourselves. And I thought that was so amazing because that's the entire point of this podcast. That's literally what we're doing here. It's amazing. And so I think this is really, really important as well. Obviously, duh. But let's talk some about seeking God today as I yank the cord of my microphone. All right, let's get into it. So today, apparently, I am beating up my camera, and we are going to talk about seeking God. What does that look like? Well, I think the first thing that so this is something I've thought about before, and the thing that I think we need to be focusing on when seeking God, or the thing that we should think about the most, is how complex it can easily become when we're trying to seek God, and there's so many different ways of doing it. So, for example, there's a lot of different church denominations. Now, I have an entire thing about this. I've done extensive research on it. I'm even writing a book about how all the different religions are the same except for Christianity. And so you'll see different denominations, inside of the Christian Protestant circle. And there's just a lot of them. And it can be very easily confusing very quickly as to how we're supposed to worship God, our theology. Theology is the study of God, how we're supposed to be focusing and prioritizing our time, all sorts of different things. So it can become a rather complex issue, but fundamentally, it really needs to be simple. When you look at the Catechism, it's not the Bible, but if you look at the Westminster Shorter Catechism, or just the Expanded whatever, it's just the Westminster Catechism, okay? The very first question in there is, what is the chief end of man? And the answer is to love God and enjoy Him forever. That's really cool. Now, the Catechism is not the Bible, and the Bible reigns supreme. I've had people try and come at me with the Catechism before, defending like Roman Catholicism, things like that. And I'm like, it's the Bible over the Catechism. But the Catechism is super fun and helpful in this instance because it really does clarify, like, that's all we're here to do. When you look at the Bible, that lines up with the Bible. It lines up with Genesis. We were placed here to work the land and to enjoy God. Like, we were here. It's amazing. So we need to really keep in mind just how simple worshiping and focusing on God should be. There are only a few things that we actually need to be focusing on, and it can be chaotic. And I'm actually starting a membership for young guys who want to learn more about this and who want to have a community to keep them together and to meet other guys and who want to be constantly learning new things and immersed in this world because it's important. We don't have a lot of accountability when it comes to stuff like this, so we really need to be on top of that, and that's what I'm working on doing. So more info about that later if you want to stick around for that. All right, let's talk about what we should be focusing on. What does focusing on God look like? What does seeking God look like? Like, where are we putting our focus? Well, really, there's only a couple things, like I said, that we're supposed to be doing, and I know when I was little, I had 3 goals. I'm like a 5-year-old, okay? I'm like 5, and I'm focusing on these 3 things. I want to be able to get married eventually. I want to be able to seek God, like focus on Him and His will and what He wants for my life. And I want to focus on doing something in the world that's going to be impactful for the world. And those were my 3 goals. Those are still my 3 goals. That's what I've wanted to do my entire life. So for me, that involves things like being on stage, making podcasts and talking, music, really large audience types of things. That's not the way it's going to be for everyone. But what we need to be focusing on here, this is just one of the aspects that we're going to talk about today, because it applies to like this very moment right now, is what we're doing glorifying God? In every single thing that we're doing, is it glorifying God? And there's so many different things we could talk about here with that, but everything what we do Okay, so for instance, ancient Mayans had the belief that every single thing they did had some sort of spiritual richness to it. So if you imagine like a scale, right? If you imagined a thermometer, every single thing that they did, even the sports games they played, were at some point infused with a certain level of like spirituality. Um, and this is across the board, okay? So this gets into a lot more of that kind of stuff I was talking about earlier. But it's it's not true, obviously. Like our sports games are not infused with our spiritual lives, right? But we do need to keep in mind that what we're doing is it glorifying to God? And are we actually focusing on where He's pulling us and where He's telling us to go? I've had recently to make a lot of difficult decisions based on coming out of just previous seasons of life and new things that I'm trying to do, new ventures I'm exploring, and just growing up. And so there's a lot of different things that I've had to do and had to weigh here too. Like, where is God calling me? In this season, in this instance, I know that a lot of it has to do with this, right? So I'm here doing this. I've got my computer here. It's not back there today. And this is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing, but inside of other aspects of life as well. So we can focus primarily on work today, but there's a lot of different ways that this can go, right? You've got relationships, you've got, your finances, you've got the activities that you're doing recreationally, spending time outside of your work, and then you've got work. Like, there's so many things. Your thought life, how you're taking care of your body, like, it's really never ending, like anything you can think of. And that's what we call natural law. And God's a part of all of this, right? Paul talks about, well, if you need, obviously, just look around the world and see that God is here. He's intrinsically infused into everything. And so to not seek God is to literally abandon life as it should be. And there's going to be a lot of pushback. I was reading yesterday in a group for Christian teenagers that I'm in, and this one kid was posting and commenting, and he was like, yo, I know this guy, he's a coworker, and he said that he used to be a Christian, but life was so hard as a Christian. There were all sorts of problems. His home even burned down. And once he left Christianity, he stopped having problems. And so it's like, of course he's stopped having problems because now he's not actively pursuing God anymore. And we live in a broken world where Satan is really closing in on us and trying to push us in and compact us, right? In the end, we know from Revelation, there's going to be a one world government. There's going to be a whole bunch of really crazy stuff that's going to happen that doesn't glorify God, and that's pointing towards this utopia. And there's going to be the Antichrist, and he's going to be the head of it. And that's going to be really bad and really crazy to have to live through whenever that happens for whoever's around then. But if we're living with intention towards God, there's going to be pushback, but we're living the way that we were created. Like I said on my reel the other day, I posted a reel, and there's a lot of people in life right now that are just looking for some sort of meaning. They're trying to find meaning and they're trying to find purpose, and they're not finding it. We have people walking around identifying as cats now because they think that's going to give them meaning and purpose and identity. But what they're missing is that their identity is in God. They're human beings. They were made in the image of God. They are intrinsically tied. I keep saying intrinsically because it's true. In with God, and we're created in the image of God. Nothing else in this world is created in the image of God, not even Satan. He was jealous. He wanted to be like God, right? He knew he could never be like God, or that he could actually be God. He wanted to be like God. And so when we look at our lives, like, what purpose do we actually have if this world doesn't have God that we could fulfill? I see so many people in the entrepreneur space. They're like, life is ultimately, life is ultimately meaningless, right? Like, everyone's going to forget you in 3 to 5 months after you die and stuff. So it doesn't matter what you do. Just make a big impact, live the way you want, die, people will forget, it doesn't matter. Okay, that is the proper approach if you are living a godless life, because suddenly that becomes your God. The idea that nothing matters, right? It's almost being atheistic about it. You're going to worship something. The Bible's very clear about that. So we'd better worship the right thing instead of worshiping the wrong thing, even on accident, if we're misguided. And my book talks about that too, that I'm writing right now. So we have to actually make sure that we're seeking God in our lives. And it's so simple for us as men, okay? There's only a few things that we need to do. We need to be focusing on our families. We need to be focusing on pursuing God himself, which is what we're talking about right now. And I'm going to get more into detail because I feel like I'm going around in circles, but it's important. And we need to be focusing on our work. Those three things form a triad. The Bible, the beginning of the Bible is full of triads, okay? That's what I call the masculine triad. Schwa! And it's what it's what we as men are supposed to be doing. So, when we look at the Bible though, let's look at Genesis. So, in the beginning of Genesis, there's what? Nothing except God. God is a Trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, right? Then he creates planet Earth. And he creates all of creation, and he creates humans. Now, we have another Trinity. We have another thing going on. If you look at marriage, you're going to see this. God, man, and woman. Right? Isn't that crazy? There's another Trinity. And inside of that Trinity, there's another one for the man. And we'll get more into the woman's one later. But he has God, his work, and his wife, and his family. And the Bible even says, like, God first, then your wife, then your kids. Another set of three. There's threes everywhere. Three is amazing. Like, it's all over the place. But we have all of these simple things. And if we can identify the systems here, then it makes our lives easier as guys. So, how do we actually get into those things? Like, how are we actually living this out? This is this is what we're supposed to be talking about here. We need to be focusing on reading the gospel. We need to read the Bible. The Bible is good news, right? I actually studied Greek, and in studying Greek, you learned that biblio, is the word for book, right? And gospel means good news, right? And I don't remember the exact translation for that one, but we're supposed to be reading the good news that God is tied into everything we are and everything we do, and we need to be focusing on glorifying him. And the only way we can glorify him is by knowing how to glorify him. And so we need to be reading the Bible to know how to glorify him so we can live out our full purpose and our full life. And so that we can leave a legacy. Because what these guys are talking about in the entrepreneur space is wrong. It's not that you die and everyone forgets you. Maybe you're not going down in history, but you're still leaving a family lineage. You're still leaving, like, your family is going to remember you for some time. You're going to be someone's parents. You're going to be someone's husband. You're going to be someone's grandparents. You're going to be their great-grandparents, right? I hear stories about a lot of grandparents in the Civil War, in World War II, like all these kinds of things. I still know about those people. So obviously, they haven't been forgotten. So we need to really think about that. We need to read the Bible. Then we need to put the Bible into practice in our own lives. And I'll give you 3 steps here. Reading the Bible, looking at ourselves, where are we going wrong? What does God say not to do that we're doing? What does God say to do that we're not doing? Did I say that twice? What God says to do that we're not doing. What God says not to do that we are doing. There we go. And just taking a self-assessment. And that's really where we see, oh my gosh, I'm such a sinful person. I need to really be reorienting myself here. And learning about this is the only way that we can do that. So we read the word first to know what he's even talking about to begin with. Then we assess ourselves, and then we implement, okay? Because knowledge is nothing if you're not applying it to your life. And obviously, go read Proverbs, again, in the Bible, reading the Bible. Proverbs talks about this, and it's like, the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of wisdom is so important. And then applying that wisdom is also really important. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on reading the Bible, first off, and then looking at ourselves and implementing those things. That's like step 1. And the steps that follow that are super complex. That's why I'm setting up this membership. It's still in its groundworking phases, but we're going to talk about all of that. And that's the whole idea, that we work through these things together as a group, and that we're working through these things in order, and that we're really just simplifying it. Because for guys, simpler is better. And I know for me, I can get so crazy overloaded. And one of the things, actually, I posted recently, and I was asking, how would you describe your brain in one word? And I got a lot of answers, and basically it boils down to chaotic and overthinking. So many people have struggles with just this intensity inside their brains. Everything is so chaotic. They're overthinking everything that they're doing, and nothing's going the way that they want it to inside their heads. And I was like, that's exactly where I used to be. And these days, thankfully, that's not a problem for me. But it's because I've spent all of this time learning these things, and I've spent all this time working on these things. And so I'm here to tell you that you can absolutely do that. So we should have another episode about that, though. But it ties in, because if we remember that our chief call in life is to enjoy God, how cool is that? That's like literally the coolest thing ever. You're being told that you just need to enjoy your Creator. Like, not that you need to work and and hustle and grind like a slave, but that you need to just enjoy God. And also, He has work that you can do, because you're made to work, also made to rest. Again, another episode, another duality that's really cool. But our chief end is to just enjoy God. So seeking God looks like learning His Word, assessing ourselves, and acting on His Word. You know, there's all sorts of conversation that always goes around as well about the unforgivable sin. And I'm sure if you've read the Gospels, and you know what that is. And basically, He's talking to the Pharisees, and Jesus is, and He says, like, be careful not to commit the unforgivable sin. He's talking to the Pharisees and the disciples, and on and off. And I'd need to pull it up to know exactly where it is. But here's the thing. The unforgivable sin is up here, knowing you're doing something wrong, and yet still continuing to do it, which is sin. But doing it in a way that is brazenly doing it, okay? Because if we're sinning, God knows we're going to sin. Christ died so that we could live our lives from the time that we accept Him to the time that we die, covered by His grace and mercy. Those two things are different, and they're very important. But if we're living under the shelter of His grace and mercy, that means that when we do sin, we just say, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I messed up. And you know what? I'm going to do it again. And that really is like, ugh, I can't stand that. But thank you so much for dying for me so that I can do the best job that I can in actively pursuing a holy life, a life set apart from this sin. And we're not going to be perfect, okay? There's no way that we can be perfect or get close enough to it ever, like at all. And so that's why He died, to impute to us all of those things. So we don't have to worry about that as long as we're making sure. Again, all of this ties back into that one singular point. This is really simple. Keep your eyes on God. That's really all that goes into this, and everything else is just case studies and examples of keep your eyes on Christ. 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 I also heard the other day that if you're focusing too much on demons and witchcraft, you're not keeping your eyes on Christ, because there's a lot of stuff that goes around, and it's like, oh my gosh, is this possessed? Is that demonic? All of these things. And the guy that was talking was making the point that that's not what we're supposed to be focusing on. We're supposed to have our focus on Christ, and if something like that gets in the way, we rebuke it in Christ's name, so that we can continue going towards Christ and getting the blockades out of our way. And that's the entire point. We're just supposed to focus on Him. And so it's a mentality. We have to mentally remember that we're supposed to be focusing on Christ. Reading the Word, it's good to set up structured time for reading the Word. And living in prayer as well. This is something that I think a lot of people neglect. And you know, I mean, I can even do it too. It's like you show up on Sunday, right? You're at church on Sunday. And then throughout the week, you just don't pray as much as you know you need to, or you know you should. And I like to maintain a constant conversation with God, because prayer needs to be reverent. And it does. And like, there's amazingness to that. But also, you're just talking to your Creator. You're just talking to God. And there doesn't have to be such an intensity to it all the time. And that's helpful for me to remember, like, this is who I'm talking to. It's good. It's just like I'm having a conversation with a friend. Obviously, He's not like just a friend. He's my Creator, but He's also the King and my brother. And it's amazing. Like, if you're going to talk to your brother, like, He's with us all the time, right? He's always here. We can have constant communication with Him. When you're growing up living with your siblings, you probably had at least frequent communication with them. I mean, you know, you might still be living with them now. And I know I am. And it's like we talk every single day. Like, we work together as a team and a family. And we want God to be the center of that. So we have to be talking to Him every single day as a team. as a family. So it's really fun just to remember that like all we need to do is focus on Christ and focus on where our heart is positioned, because that's the ultimate goal. That's what all the false religions try and take you off of. There's all the sacraments that you need to do. There's all of the rituals that you need to do. Okay, it's like the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church. I mean, right? We were talking about the Mayans. Their sports games had spiritual tie-ins, like all these different crazy things. But the focus should be on your heart. Where is your heart attitude? The unforgivable sin, obviously, is I'm actively rejecting what I know to be true and what I know you're saying. And I'm like, I've seen people do this before. This is not something that I don't have experience with. I have close personal experience with, that it's affected me personally. People committing this sin, or at least something really close to it if it wasn't this sin. But that's what this is. And so if we can keep our heart attitude focused on, I guess that's what I should be saying here. We're seeking God because we're focusing our heart on God, right? He made our heart. Like everything goes back. He's the beginning and the end of everything, the Alpha and the Omega. And our job is to keep ourselves focused on him because we want to, because that's our job. He made us simply because he could, because he loves us, because he enjoys us, and because he wanted us to be able to enjoy him. It's really awesome how this works when you just simply live the way that he designed and intended, because it's so beautiful and it's so pure and clean. And we're the ones that mess that up. The fact that he would continue seeking us after we've rebelled against him, and after we've sinned, and after we've directly disobeyed his words to us is really cool. So I hope this is the episode that you guys were hoping for. If not, you know what? This is the theme of the podcast. So we're going to talk more about this, and let me know. Like, message me on Instagram, message me wherever you can. And just let me know, like, what did you think of this episode? And do you want to hear more about this kind of stuff? And again, that's what this entire membership is going to be about. So follow me on the social medias so that you know when that episode is coming out. You can just find me by looking up Isaiah Keene, or by looking up Making Men Academy at Making Men Academy with underscores between each word. Each letter, not each word, each letter. No, word, each word. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will see you later. Remember, we've got to keep our hearts focused on Christ so that our sight will stay on Christ. He talks about that. Your heart and your eyes are interconnected, they're intertwined. Even in Proverbs, they're actually completely the same thing. Solomon uses them almost like he replaces. You can use them, what's the word? All right, brothers, remember, keep your heart focused on Christ so that you keep your eyes focused on Christ, and you will be seeking the Lord. Just genuinely pursue him, genuinely want to be in fellowship with him, and everything else should follow suit. I'll see you guys later.